A black car rolls along the street and parks near a factory. A local mob boss called Charles DeMario is meeting an acquaintance who deals with certain businesses that might pique his interest, and a couple of his bodyguards follow him into the factory. The factory was partly lit and Charles DeMario was a little concerned about might happen if it goes badly. They approach a storage area where this acquaintance was waiting for them. The acquaintance was sitting at a table with a chair facing him. He had a lean and menacing face. He wore gray suit with matching fedora and he had a name, Studs Maloney. Charles DeMario shook hands with him and started to talk business ideas. Studs Maloney prompted his idea of selling hooch or moonshine as some regions call it. Charles DeMario was unsure of it, but Studs Maloney encouraged him to consider. The idea of selling a drink that's inferior to whiskey and the bars around the borough would benefit it. Charles DeMario was interested at the prospect, but one thing he wanted to get through before the business deal would finish was to sample the hooch Studs Maloney was presenting. Studs Maloney agreed to it and brought a glass bottle containing the hooch. Charles DeMario took a swig from a glass of it and knocked it back. He felt a painful and acidic feeling in his stomach. The bodyguards grouchily questioned Studs Maloney if he was trying to poison him, and he said no. He got the hooch from an unknown supplier that would confuse or even baffle them. Charles DeMario was starting to sweat and breath heavily. He ordered the bodyguards to shoot Studs Maloney for an act of sabotage. Studs Maloney leaped up out his chair and brought out a silver fob watch with a chain. Charles DeMario jokingly said if he going to tell them the time, but Studs Maloney had a different outcome. He pushed the top of the fob watch and then time froze. Everything was still and Studs Maloney pulled out a pistol. He shot Charles DeMario and his bodyguards while they were still standing. He pressed the top of the fob watch again and the mob boss with his bodyguards fell to the floor like sacks of potatoes with bullet holes in them. Charles DeMario and his bodyguards were shot dead by Studs Maloney. He looked at the gunshot corpses, stood on the dead body of Charles DeMario and slightly grinned. He patted the fob watch and walked off out the factory, planning for another business venture for his gut rot hooch. The TARDIS had landed on a street corner and the doctor rushed out quickly. Louisa followed him and looked back at the TARDIS. The lights were flashing rapidly and lightning was circling it continuously. The doctor was frustrated at what has happened. There was time distortion in the area and had affected the TARDIS flight. Louisa asks if it has happened before. The doctor says it happens rarely and explains that certain individuals can mess with time can be one of the main causes. Louisa was looking around at where they landed. The doctor observes the area and says they landed in the mid-1920s. Brooklyn to be precise. Louisa was quite ecstatic about this time period. She's seen the film Some Like It Hot and Bugsy Malone. The doctor was trying to remember Bugsy Malone if it was the one with child actors shooting cream out of Tommy guns, and Louisa agreed. The doctor brought out a small device and Louisa asked if it was to detect time distortion. The doctor pleasantly smiled at her and continued walking down the streets. Studs Maloney was lurking nearby. He saw the TARDIS and approached it. He touched it with genuine appraisal and sorta knew what it was. He seemed to know who was here and was keen to seek out who he believed to be the doctor. Louisa got a newspaper and read some of the headlines. Stuff about Al Capone and Pretty Boy Floyd. Then she read something about up-and-coming gangsters getting shot down in a flash by an unknown stranger. The doctor leaned over and wonders if that was causing the time distortion around the borough. The two walk into one of the local speakeasies called Gentleman Joe's. They witness a cabaret act and decide to sit down to watch it. The speakeasy's regulars were entranced by the performance until it got slightly disturbed by Louisa's whistling with her fingers and the doctor told her to knock it off. The doctor was drinking a mint julep and Louisa a gin Ricky. After the cabaret performance, Louisa was interested in meeting the performers to ask about their choreography, who designed their costumes and how long rehearsals take. The doctor sneakily tried to dissuade her, but she begged him to go and see them. The doctor reluctantly gave in and let her go off. Studs Maloney came into the speakeasy and stopped. He leaned over a little and saw the doctor sitting at the table on his own. Studs Maloney came over and parked himself next to him. The doctor looked at him and Studs Maloney looked at his cream linen suit. He told the doctor he's got a exotic dress style and the doctor just shrugged at this. Studs Maloney introduces himself and says he a hooch salesman. The doctor quizzically asked him on how he ended in that profession and Studs Maloney replied with a just chance of luck as he calls it. The doctor's eyes looked down and saw something technological on Stud Maloney's wrist. He knew what it was. a vortex manipulator, and Studs Maloney just stared at him. The doctor's questioning became more serious and wanted to know where Studs Maloney actually comes from. Studs Maloney said he comes from the 25th century and recently came out of Stormcage. The doctor asked why he was locked up. Studs Maloney mentioned he did some trafficking, some very illegal goods, and got caught out by the authorities. Meanwhile, Louisa secretly entered the backstage of the speakeasy. She comes across the performers and started small talk with them. One of them, Adrienne, tells her to keep quiet. Louisa asked why. Then a cigar-chomping man in a pinstripe suit walked in and ordered the girls to get ready for the next performance. The man was called Gordon Lorenzo and he's a businessman who deals with stardom. Louisa was looked on at him and then Gordon Lorenzo laid his eyes on her. He asked her where she's from and Louisa mentioned she's from Iowa. Gordon Lorenzo seized an opportunity and asked her if she wanted to join his cabaret troupe. Louisa hesitated. Gordon Lorenzo presented her wad of $100 and a small wooden box. She asked what's in it. Gordon Lorenzo said it's snuff, a powdered drug that can be inhaled through the nostrils. Louisa just laughed at this, but Gordon Lorenzo, charming, charismatic, professional attitude turned more intense and grabbed her wrist tightly. She's going to be one of his girls, his puppet and a big money earner. He brought Louisa to the costume rack, told her to put on the cabaret suit and Louisa unwillingly put on. Gordon Lorenzo watched her getting changed, looking at her body while smoking a cigar, and brought Adrienne forward to show her dance numbers in an hour before the next performance. When it was time, the cabaret troupe were at the side of the stage and Louisa looked on at the punters. She then took a deep breath. The doctor told Studs Maloney that what he's doing would affect the web of time. Studs Maloney's eyes raised up and said that the doctor is a time lord. The doctor just stared at him and replied with yes. Studs Maloney mentioned the TARDIS and notices its potential for his business reasons. The doctor scolded, told him that the TARDIS is not for taking, and then Studs Maloney brought out his fob watch. He pressed it and everything froze. The doctor looked round and asked, was Studs Maloney trying to freeze in time to steal the TARDIS key? Studs Maloney's face turned more angrily and tried to activate his vortex manipulator to escape. But the doctor slammed his hand on it and caused both men to teleport across other sides of the speakeasy. The doctor was near the stage while Studs Maloney by the doorway. The doctor got up and headed to the doorway. Then Studs Maloney disappeared in a flash. The doctor raced out of Gentleman Joe's. The city was frozen in time and quickly tried to find Studs Maloney to stop him. Studs Maloney appeared out of nowhere and pulled out a Tommy gun. He fired randomly at the doctor, trying to scare like a jackrabbit. The doctor quickly ducked behind cars and leaned against buildings. Suddenly the fob watch dropped out of Studs Maloney and broke into pieces. All of time was back in motion. Louisa, in the middle of the depressing cabaret performance, leaped from the stage and started to hop from table to table like the floor was made of lava. Adrienne looked on at her. She shed a tear and carried on with the show. She and the rest of Girls in Time would escape this cattle farm from the criminally big-suited men. The doctor reached the alleyway where Studs Maloney went to. He shouted for him. He wanted to bring him out so he can face him and take him down. Studs Maloney reappeared and asked the doctor for a duel. The doctor accepted this and prepared for what's to come. The two men turned their backs and walked 10 paces in their opposite directions. They quickly turned and Studs Maloney shot the doctor in the right shoulder. The doctor fell to the ground and Studs Maloney walked over. He says to the doctor that he's finished and prepared to put a bullet into the doctor's head. The doctor called his bluff and Studs Maloney cocked his pistol ready to fire. Suddenly the vortex manipulator's circuits began to fry. Studs Maloney tried to violently wriggle it off but started to get electrically torn apart and Manly cried in pain. The doctor used the sonic screwdriver to burn out the manipulator and sporadically sent various body parts of Studs Maloney are sent into different time zones, killing him instantly and forever scattered across time. The doctor laid back on the ground and eventually got himself up. His right shoulder was bleeding but carried on. It was only a flesh wound and headed back to the TARDIS. Louisa was waiting for him and came to him instantly. She asked if he's alright and the doctor grunted in pain but reassured her that he'll fine. All he needs is a pair of tweezers, guide wire and a needle. They both enter the TARDIS able to take over without interruption.